My name is 𝓐𝓪𝓻𝓽. I'm an existential psychotherapist with a specialization in parental alienation. I'm also currently working in collaboration locally with the Happy Parenting Association. The biggest challenge I find is actually when it comes to taking the case to court, especially if parental alienation would have started before it ends up in court. The problems I find at the moment are numerous, one of which is that it seems that I have to be on one side when I'm actually sending the message to courts that this is a situation which needs to be addressed on both sides, in one way with the alienating parent and in another way with the alienated parent. The difficulty is when I don't get any defense from both sides. So of course I already have the alienating parent which is on the attack, and then I have a very helpless alienated parent. The problem is that when parental alienation is seeping in and has been there for a long time, then the parent is very weak. The alienated parent is very helpless. He can't even help himself. He would have been trying for many years avoiding confrontation with the other parent, and as a result he would be in a way presenting a very weak case. Now of course the professional is there to support the alienated parent, but not without the help of his lawyer. So if his lawyer is not trained enough to see the importance of the support, then even the professional is in a difficult situation. So at the moment I'm finding myself being shut up, being discredited, I also have been told that I'm incompetent, that I'm unprofessional, of course because the language I am presenting is a different language altogether. And
you said he as an alienated.
Yes.
Could be he or she.
It could be a he or a she. I mean, in most cases, I find myself in a situation where the father is being alienated, but this doesn't exclude that a mother can also be alienated from her children. It depends very much on the culture, and I would say very much on the situation. I find that when there is enmeshment with the grandparents, in particular when they're very influential in the marriage of this couple who has the children, then we have a more complicated situation.
There seems to be only few professionals in Malta who are trained in parental alienation.
Yes, I only know of a couple who have actually trained properly in parental alienation. The other psychologists and psychotherapists have kind of gained some information on the way, but I find that they still rely on the recommendations of court. So if people in court, if the judiciary does not have adequate training, even the recommendations are not going to be the right recommendations for professionals to work on. I mean, the current recommendations are still an assessment, by an independent psychologist, a court-appointed psychologist, meaning that the psychologist doesn't know or is not a familiar or a colleague of both parents. I'm saying this because this is a common allegation on the professional, that the common allegation is that I somehow have an affinity with the alienated parent. This is not the first time I get this allegation. So it is useless. Sometimes the court actually still recommends the generic therapy, which is family therapy and child therapy. But it is useless having the child alone with me in the session when I need to have the alienated parent present. I'm currently working on a reunification program with a child who hasn't seen her father for 8 months. And it's impressive, the splitting that is brought out in her play during the session. The way she rejects her father continuously during the session. I wouldn't be able to have it and address it if I don't have the father present. Because what is needed in a reunification program? the father, I'm using the father as an example, as I said, it could also be the mother, but in this case, okay, there is the father who needs to be very patient to welcome this rejection. So usually during the first stages of a reunification program, the child will continuously reject the parent, and the parent would have to be very patient with this. The role of the therapist is to mediate, to support, so to make the child aware of how much he is rejecting the parent, and to be of support to the parent not to give up in this very critical stage. In many situations, the success rate of a reunification program, which includes not only activity-based intervention, but also a temporary change of residence for the intervention to take place, is very effective. I mean, there has been research which has shown a 92% of success. Sometimes it varies in countries. Some countries have it even up to 95%. It depends, of course, on the extent of the professionals and how far they are trained to be able to do the work. I mean, there are courts, for example, like the one in Romania, there is no debate. A recommendation is given and it has to happen. When in other situations, for example, like Israel at the moment, I have a lot of social workers whom I'm in touch with, they struggle because they don't get enough support from judiciary, even though their judiciary is trained. So you see, it's still a work in progress, so to say.
The reunification program.
Yes.
They are quite expensive.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about a reunification program, we're actually saying that the therapist is going to be available for almost 4 to 6 hours a week, solely for that family over a period of 21 days generally. So yes, it might actually come up to 1,500, 2,000 euros even just to do that part. In fact, in other countries, they actually hand in an estimation to the judge prior to the work taking place. It is definitely still better to do it than not to do it. Unfortunately, it is still a misunderstanding. They don't understand that the child, an alienated child, would have taken complete control of the situation. When it comes to the alienated child, because there is this misunderstanding that the alienating parent is still doing the work on the child. The problem is this: when this takes too long to be intervened, when court takes too long, the child takes over. The child becomes the alienating parent, and he will continue or she will continue the alienation by herself or himself. The child will take control of the situation. The child will no longer need the alienating parent. They will develop this language and do it themselves. So that goes even beyond psychological splitting. They take the role of the alienating parent. It's horrible to see, actually. So when we speak of a reunification program, one aspect of a reunification program is an activity-based intervention. That means that the therapist is going to move out of her clinic completely and is outside in a public place with the parent. So, for example, the therapist in my case, I would have already agreed with a number of activities with the parent. I would leave it up to the parent to organize these activities, and then I would meet the parent on the chosen activity. So say, for example, the more common ones are doing activities on the beach, planning picnics, horse riding. That we also are privileged in our country that we have a lot of shelters for animals. Those are fantastic places to do an activity-based intervention. They're the most effective, actually. The idea is to have the parent there, the children are brought to the place, the chosen place, and the therapist will join. So the therapist will also get there independently of the children and the father. And usually it is more than 1 hour. So when we're talking about an activity-based intervention, we're talking at least about 3 hours straight, where the therapist remains present with the parent and the children. Now, of course, the most important aspect of an activity-based intervention is the escalation, in the sense that you start meeting this parent-child group often. So it can't happen like we therapists do, a session once a week. That cannot work. Okay, so if, for example, the first activity happened on a Sunday, the next activity needs to be planned at least on the Wednesday, following that on the following Sunday, okay? And moving the child gradually to the child's community, to the parent's community. What does it mean? So where the father lives. So the activity-based intervention moves closer to the father's house, and then in the father's house, we are not used to having therapists present in fathers' or mothers' homes. We're not used to having intervention happening in homes. I mean, we have the home-based therapy, but this is something different. We're saying here that there is a parent who's trying to get the children warm up to him or her again, and the therapist is there to help out with a daily routine, meaning dinner, meaning homework, meaning putting them to sleep, literally a basic, mundane, everyday activity. That is what we mean by an activity-based intervention. The final phase of an activity-based intervention is when then the children are willing to sleep over at the parent's house. That is already the first sign of success. Once that is in place, an immediate reporting needs to be sent back to the court, where this remains as is. Okay, so then after that, the excess hours need to be revisited, where then the children have almost an equal access to both parents, I would say. We also have to make a distinction between alienation and estrangement. When we're talking about estrangement, we're actually saying that the alienated parent does not have a memory of the child as a baby. Okay, so there is it's missing completely. So an estranged parent wouldn't be able to give you any narrative. There is no story about their child as a baby. For example, I get parents during the intervention actually reminding the child of the memory, and then you can see the connection happening, because the parent is providing a memoir. The parent is capable of providing a memory where the child can connect to. The child can connect to those memories and can actually help the child become closer. Of course, when we're also talking about alienation, we have to exclude domestic violence altogether, okay? And we also have to exclude any abusive incidents. If there are indications of abuse, those have to be addressed first before we actually explore whether they are a result of alienation, because sometimes abuse comes as a result of long-standing alienation. Yes. So, for instance, a parent might start hitting a child as part of the alienation process, or a parent can start making allegations about abuse from the other parent as part of the alienation process. So these have to be assessed very much in detail and in depth. And the worst part of it all is when court takes very long to address this.